All right, well, hearing Leah's calendar reminder tells me it must be the top of the hour. I'm delighted to welcome you all to the Admissions and Financial Aid Q&A. We're so grateful that you all would take some time out of your day to learn a bit more about Dickinson. So many of our students and families have been along with us for this virtual open house. It's been really exciting to watch the sessions unfold. Of course, this is the first time we've done something exactly like this, and I'm so delighted to be joined here tonight by two of my very favorite colleagues. I'll kick it off with introductions, then pass it off to my colleague Leah, and then off to my colleague Brian Atkins to introduce themselves. So to start, my name is Greg Moyer. I am the Assistant Vice President for Enrollment here at Dickinson College. I'm also a proud Dickinson alumnus. My wife also happens to be a Dickinson alumna, and this is my 15th, now 16th admissions cycle with the college. So again, thank you all for joining us. We're really delighted to have you. Leah.
Hi, my name is Leah Young. I'm the Director of Financial Aid here at Dickinson College. And I'm just so happy to be in this role where I get to help families navigate how to pay for college and hopefully how to make the process seem a little bit less daunting than it may be right now to you. So thrilled to be with you this afternoon. And looking forward to your great questions.
Yeah, hello, my name is Brian Atkins. I'm the Director of International Admissions here at Dickinson. I'm also responsible for the states of Oregon and Washington. And not quite as many cycles as Greg, but I've been here for 9 years.
Prior to Brian's arrival, though, one of the many talents that Brian has is extensive knowledge of the wider world, and having lived in almost more places than I can count, which is, I think, more commentary on how many places he lives and not on my ability to count high numbers. And so
I would maybe argue with that, Greg.
Leah's here definitely to keep me honest, for sure. And actually, that's a great way to kick it off. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the admission side, and then, of course, my colleague Leah is going to jump in and talk about the aid side. We invite you all, please, to put your questions in the Q&A. Brian will remain on the call here too and help us monitor the Q&A. And then we will, like I said to a few of you that have popped in a bit early, that we hope to be able to leave ample time to answer your questions too. So I'll try to take about 5 minutes, 7 minutes. Leah told me she'll cut me off at the 15-minute mark and to explain how we approach admissions here at Dickinson. And like I said, pass it off to Leah too. There are any number of places I think we could start with this, what we think is a really important conversation, but I think perhaps the most important thing to know about the Dickinson admissions process, and something I really hope that if you've participated in our virtual open house so far, you've really seen and experienced, which is Dickinson takes a very personal approach to our enrollment process. Just like every single one of you out there, all of you students has an admissions officer. Every single one of you also has a financial aid officer, and I know Leah will confirm that she has an incredibly talented, eager, and thoughtful team that, just as we on the admissions side, approaches the financial aid side with real earnestness with each and every one of their families too. So I would say at the onset and likely at the very end, I'll tell you to reach out to us, to be in touch with us, to please let us know what we can do to be helpful. Brian covers much of the globe, and like he said, the Pacific Northwest. I cover a small part of the state of New Jersey, but we cover everything in between, and we're really delighted to help you. It leads really well, I think, into another theme that is important that I think we want to leave you with, that is Dickinson approaches our review process in a really holistic way. I suspect you've heard that, as you've perhaps already heard from other colleges, especially liberal arts colleges, that we really do have the luxury of reading every single one of our applications line by line, word by word. No one needs to be reminded that this has been an incredibly disruptive year, and we know that students will have perhaps in many cases more complicated stories to tell. But one of the, we think, advantages that we have here at Dickinson is the ability to really listen to those stories. What I feel really good about for this year is that what has always been a really human process for Dickinson remains a really human process for us. That has not been altered by the pandemic or any other moment in time, that we approach every single application like there's a person and a story on the other side that we are excited to learn about, that is often different than the person we just read and will likely be different than the person we read after that too. Things that we look for are, of course, things that you know. The most important thing for us is a student's ability to do the work in the classroom. And we can definitely talk more about that, but we pay close attention to the type of academician students have been in their high school communities and what they might be like once they get to the Dickinson community. One thing that I want to remember to tell you all, if I don't mention it later, is that Dickinson has been a test optional school since 1994. We were one of the first colleges and universities in the nation to do it. And we are, this year, recently announced that Dickinson will be test blind for this admission cycle. So why that is important is because we know, again, that there's been an incredibly uneven amount of access to testing, not just in the United States, but around the world. And hearing from our students and families over the last few months really demonstrated to us that there was an incredibly high amount of anxiety about this admission cycle, more than any of my other admission cycles at Dickinson. And I suspect that doesn't surprise you. And one of the biggest moments of anxiety was around testing. What it would mean for us in our process, what it might mean for us in our scholarship review process. And so we felt very strongly that for the senior class, and we will reevaluate it for the juniors and the sophomores and the first years and the 8th graders and the 7th graders and any other subsequent classes to come. But for this senior class that's applying to Dickinson College this year, we will be test blind, meaning that we will not take any scores into consideration as part of your application review process. You know, we've been asked what that will mean for us and how we'll review differently. And I think we've been really confidently able to say that we've been reviewing applications without scores for 26 years. And that we really do know how to evaluate students beyond their testing. And I think, again, we do have the luxury of paying attention to those really specific and individual stories. So certainly academics are important to us, as are extracurriculars, the things you do out to the classroom. We know those will look different this year. We understand that, we expect that, and we look forward to understanding those different stories as you tell them to us. We look forward to hearing from your teachers and your counselors and everybody in the process, as those voices play an important role for us as well, to, again, a holistic approach to the application process. I would say too, that we've heard a lot from families about demonstrated interest. Dickinson was one of those schools that for years used demonstrated interest as part of our application review process, and that's a term that's unfamiliar to you. It typically means a family's likelihood to show up on our campus and go on a tour, or maybe meet us off campus for an alumni interview, or perhaps attend one of our receptions in your hometown, or when we show up at your high school for a high school visit, meet us there. Those are great examples of you demonstrating interest, or sending us an email or a letter to your regional counselor. And know too that we understand that this year will look different in those ways too, that students are finding interesting and creative ways to show us that they've done good research about Dickinson. And a lot of those ways this year will be not showing up on our campuses, for instance. It will be building relationships with us, or really thoughtfully crafting an application. Those will be the ways that students will demonstrate their strong research and their genuine interest in Dickinson. I want to talk about two more things, then pass it off to my colleague, Leah. One of them is the application deadlines. Just to let you know, they're coming up, of course. Dickinson has 2 rounds of early decision. Early decision 1, which is on November 15th, and early decision 2, which is on January 15th. So 2 rounds of a binding way to apply to Dickinson. Leah's going to talk to you in a second about the financial aid side, and I just want you to know that one of the things that Dickinson attempts to do with you is provide for families that are considering early decision through Dickinson, which is, of course, again, a binding agreement that if you are admitted to Dickinson through early decision, you are expected to enroll. There are a lot of perhaps complicating factors around making that decision. And we love when families certainly consider Dickinson as their top choice and ultimately apply to us as early decision candidates. But financials are often a concern for families. And one of the things that we do here at Dickinson is actually provide an early merit pre-read. So that means that you can get a sense for what your merit scholarships might look like if you are considering early decision round 1 or early decision round 2. Leah's going to mention briefly in a second too that we also do the same thing on the financial aid side. Our goal, right, for early decision families is to give you a sense as close as we are possibly able, and Leah's incredibly good at this, hitting the nail on the head so you have a really good sense for what your financial aid package might look like on the other side too. Of course, Dickinson has regular decision. It's also January 15th, so look for any one of those 3 ways to apply to Dickinson coming up. The last thing I wanted to mention too, and I briefly mentioned this, that Dickinson has, we do have merit-based scholarships. It's one of the ways that we make a Dickinson education possible for our families. And there are 5 different types of scholarships, and not just 5 that we give out, but 5 different types, and they range from $15,000 to $20,000 to $25,000 to $30,000 to $35,000 per year. So, of course, if you're awarded the $20,000 scholarship in your first year, it would actually be $80,000 over your 8 semesters at Dickinson, or 8 semesters of study at Dickinson. There is no additional application required for the $15,000, $20,000, $25,000, or $30,000 merit scholarships. That, in fact, if you apply to Dickinson and you are admitted, you're automatically considered for a merit-based scholarship. It goes off to a separate merit review committee and is done as part of that process. You don't have to write an additional essay or do anything else to your application. And of course, as I mentioned, Dickinson is test blind, so we won't require any testing for any of our merit scholarships. The presidential scholarship, the $35,000 scholarship, so $35,000 a year, which is, I think, Leah, about half tuition. This is where math gets involved, and I look at Leah to shake her head.
It's about half the cost of attendance, including room and board.
Perfect.
It's more than half tuition.
This is why Leah gets to come in with great good news, right? Yeah, that tuition for us is actually less than that, and then it's half the cost of attendance. And so $35,000 a year, or $70,000, $150,000 over the course of your Dickinson lifetime. But that one does require an additional application. You can find all that information online, and we'd be happy to help talk to you about that too. So I'm going to pause and know that there are many other things to talk about when it comes to the admissions process, financial aid, making it possible, the different types of deadlines, and I'm happy to dig into that too. But I'm going to pass it off to my colleague Leah to talk a little bit about financial aid first. So take it away,
Very
Leah.
good. Thanks, Greg. You fit in pretty close to that timeline. 9 minutes, pretty close on the dot.
The best ever.
Very proud, very proud. I do tease, Greg is one of my, again, I'll return the favor, one of my favorite colleagues. There's ongoing banter between financial and admissions folks at many different schools over who are the extroverts and who are the introverts. In most cases, the admissions folks are those extroverts that like to talk, whereas the financial aid people are more paper oriented. And I like to think I can live in both worlds. But I'm here to just expand on the need-based financial aid process and what goes into that, what our application deadlines are, some things to consider, and how that plays into the merit that Greg just talked about. So one of my favorite things about Dickinson is that we meet full demonstrated need. So what does that word demonstrated, or the phrase demonstrated need mean? That is determined by 2 applications. So Dickinson College does require completion of both the Fafsa, the free application for student aid, that nearly every school will require to consider for any type of need-based aid, as well as the CSS profile that is through the College Board. So we use the Fafsa to evaluate your federal financial aid eligibility, and we use the CSS profile to determine your institutional need-based eligibility. So for things like grants that come directly from Dickinson College, as well as we have some institutional loans that are very, very favorable, even more favorable than the federal loans that we have to look at as well for eligibility. So we do require those forms. And if any of you have completed the CSS profile before, you know that it is more in depth than the Fafsa. So you want to leave yourself some time to complete that. So why do we ask you for all of this extra information? It's really because we're trying to get the best picture. As with most institutions, we don't have unlimited coffers, so we're trying to make sure that that need-based aid is allocated to the folks who truly do need that the most. So we do ask for more information. So how does that play out for you and your family? Essentially, if you have a situation that does not fit well onto a number crunching calculation, the CSS profile is going to allow you to express that more fully. So for example, the CSS profile asks about things like medical expenses. It asks about special circumstances. So you have an opportunity to write in changes that have happened since the data that it's asking you about. So the base year for evaluating need-based financial aid for the next application cycle, so for the 21-22 academic year, is 2019. And we all know that life is very different now than it was in 2019. So there are going to be many people that are going to have circumstances that have changed. And the CSS profile allows you to give us information on 2020 and projections for 2021, as well as describe your circumstances. The Fafsa is just going to pull numbers from 2019. So there's not that nuance. Again, it allows us to give a personalized look, so we know if we need to reach out to the family to get more information, that we can just take more things into account. It also does take a closer look at assets than the FAFSA. So essentially, if you live in a higher cost of living area, the FAFSA treats everyone the exact same way. And if all things are equal, the CSS profile is going to determine that you can pay less if you live in San Francisco and make the same salary as someone who lives in maybe rural Texas and makes that salary. So that's one of the benefits. But then on the other side, if you have a lot of assets, the CSS profile might tell us that you can, you are in a stronger financial situation than the FAFSA may tell us. So that's sort of just a short overview of how that plays out with different folks and why that number can differentiate from the FAFSA. Now, for those of you who don't want to wait until you get that acceptance, another important thing to add, Dickinson College releases admissions decisions and financial aid offers at the same time. So if you've completed an on-time financial aid application, and our deadlines are the exact same as the admissions deadlines. So for early decision, one, you're applying that same deadline, November 15th. Greg, please, your turn to jump in and correct me if I've gotten the date wrong. And then for regular decision and early decision 2, your application for financial aid is due the same time as your admissions application. So on-time applications will have their full need met, and they will receive their offer with their admissions decision. So that means you don't have that gap of trying to figure out, okay, I got in, but can I pay for it? So let's say you don't want to wait that long. Let's say you're trying to consider whether early decision is right for you. As Greg said, we do offer early reads. And the first step for that is to complete the net price calculator. Every college, accredited college in the nation, is required to put a net price calculator on their website. That is an excellent way to try to understand what your cost may be for each individual college. So please know that, utilize that. If you type it in the search bar, it comes up quickly. That's the trick for any college website. It's going to ask for that information, and it will give you a detailed estimate, and it's really very close. So if you'd like us to look at that and make sure that you entered everything correctly, we'll ask you to securely submit a copy of your tax returns and W-2s. We'll check it for you and let you know if that estimate is accurate. If you're just looking to get a ballpark, we also offer My Intuition with 5 easy questions. You can get a ballpark of a low, best, and high estimate of what your aid may be based on what others in similar situations have gotten, and that takes less than about 3 minutes to look at that. So those are on our cost calculator pages on our website. And again, just to reiterate, we are a college that cares a lot about individual situations. So on our financial aid site, there's a meet the staff page, and you can see who your dedicated staff member is. It's assigned by last name, and they are a dedicated group. You can reach out either to the financial aid general account or to that counselor in specifically and ask for that early read if you are interested in early decision. If that's not a consideration, we would recommend that you look at those calculators as your estimate before submitting for regular decision. But we're happy for those who are really trying to figure out if Dickinson is the right way to go and to commit to help you know what that responsibility would be ahead of time. So yes, that's my quick synopsis in 7-ish minutes. So we are ready for your questions. And Greg, if I left anything out, feel free to chime in.
No, and as Leah said, we saw some questions coming in the Q&A, and Brian's been able to answer some of those in real time. And Leah, I'm wondering, while we just give a minute, there are a couple questions coming in live now, and let those questions roll in for 2 seconds. And maybe one of the things that I know I've heard you talk about in the past is average debt and default rates. And I know that's not maybe the most exciting thing to talk about on a Saturday night, but especially perhaps for admissions, for financial aid officers, and really for me, as I talk to my families and students around the country, and this vast network of Dickinson alums that live across the United States and around the world, that for me, the college's default rate, especially as you compare it to even our peers, or nationally, is Dickinson delivering on that promise? So I'm wondering if just 2 seconds could talk about that too.
I love that set, and I'm ready to spike that that question. So, you know, there's a lot of concern, and rightly so, about student loan debt in this country, because we meet full demonstrated need with a small amount of self-help. So most students over the course of their 4 years, the average federal loan debt is just over $20,000, which is about a $200 repayment each month. And our cohort default rate, which looks at 3 years post-graduation, how are our students, our graduates, doing at paying the loans that they received down and checking default rates. We have a 0% default rate as of our last cohort, which just got officially released about a month and a half ago. So of that class of 2017, no one has entered into default. That is incredibly unusual. And the average for private schools has been hovering around 7% for private colleges. And the national average sort of swings between about 10 and 13%. So our graduates are being able to successfully manage their loans after college and are graduating with reasonable debt loads. We want to make sure that our students have good information about what debt is. We provide an annual debt letter, which is also something that Pennsylvania has enacted, and that I fully agree is a great tool for making sure students know how much they are borrowing and what that's going to look like after repayment, and to really try to help educate folks about what is responsible loan borrowing, because it doesn't have to be this evil thing if it is used responsibly. It is a tool to help pay for college, and like it's it can be used for good and is not always this terrible thing. It's also a great way for students to build some credit and have quote unquote good debt. Again, the general wisdom is to try to borrow less than your anticipated first year salary off of college. That if you do that, you should be able to pay that out of your budget without significant pain points. So that's my spiel on student loans.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I think it's just worth mentioning, like Leah said too, and I'm sure someone has said this to you, but 98% of our students are either employed or in graduate school 1 year after graduation. Our acceptance rate into med school last year was 95% and 94% into law school. The acceptance rate into medical school nationally is 37% versus our 95, and into law school is 75 versus our 94. And so it is about exactly what Leah just said. It's about delivering on that promise where students can find jobs, find graduate school opportunities, find opportunity that allows them to do the things that they want to do with their lives, to follow those passions. So we're seeing great questions come in. One of the first ones that came in, I'll try to tackle. There are two about merit scholarships and kind of how we approach them. In particular, as it relates to maybe a GPA and testing. And so these are great questions, because it is something that, again, it's not something we're unfamiliar with, having reviewed merit scholarships in the absence of testing. But to the good questions point, this will be the first year where there will be no testing at all, right, across the board for all of our students. And so I do think Dickinson, not like any other, highly selective liberal arts colleges, pays really close attention to what you do in the classroom. I mentioned that earlier, and to the first question that came in about the GPA. So we do pay attention to your performance in the classroom, the challenge, the difficulty, the rigor of your curriculum. We pay attention to your context, and we get asked about that often, right? Like, I go to this high school or that high school, and how does that compare? And so Dickinson really does connect the nexus of those three things, right? And many other things, but specifically your performance, the strength of your curriculum, and what's your context look like. And it's actually that relationship that allows us to really understand not only a student's ability to be successful at Dickinson, but how they compare to the rest of the applicant pool, right? And that doesn't directly answer the question about a specific GPA, one versus another, but it should reassure families that have done well, or students, I guess, in this case, that have done really well in the classroom, that we are paying attention to that strong performance. And of course, our presidentials, our provosts, and our highest scholarship levels go to our most academically strong students, and also students with really interesting talent or things that they've done outside of the classroom, commitment and leadership, followership, the chance to get involved in something they love, a chance to bounce back from adversity. There are any number of reasons. We have quite a bit of latitude in how we award merit scholarships. It makes answering this question really difficult, but I hope it does give you all a bit of hope, because there isn't exactly a rubric that we follow in every single case. Makes it challenging for you to understand how we'll do it, but I think it gives us the liberty to look into a student's file and say, this is a really interesting and compelling applicant that we would love to see at Dickinson. So great questions about merit scholarships. Leah, I'm seeing a question here about, does Dickinson require the CSS profile and the Fafsa for merit-based scholarships? So would we require those forms for merit scholarships?
No, and I answered a similar question as well in the chat that hopefully everyone can see. The admissions office decides the merit scholarships and the CSS profile and merit, and FAFSA are not a piece of that. It is truly merit only consideration for those. The only reason you would need to file an application is if you're interested in student loans, again, and that would require the FAFSA for federal loans.
Yeah, great questions. I'm seeing another question here. What percentage of students are early decision versus regular who commit to attend? And this is a really good question. And I don't know if Anna, if you're asking because you've heard about this in kind of the wider world of higher education, and if that's the case, know that we've heard this too. And that concern about what early decision or what the class next year might look like because of the amount of defers that have happened nationally, that because families were really uncertain about what this past fall, or the current fall, I should say, might look like, some of them chose to defer for a semester or for a full year. So it really is almost essentially putting them into the next early decision class next year, if that makes sense, right? They're committed families that just deferred their enrollment for 1 year into the next class. And so again, just like early decision would, it's building that foundation of the class. And that's really what early decision does for us, right? Early decision 1 and early decision 2 builds that foundation of the class. So I can tell you, just from a Dickinson perspective, we did have a number of families choose to defer. Our average is around 10 to 15 families a year, and we had around 30-ish families choose to defer for the full year this year. One of the things that I think Dickinson did that was really responsive to our current circumstances was offer a semester deferral program. So we definitely want all these families to enroll, and about 75 families chose to defer for just 1 semester. And we're working with them right now, and we fully anticipate that almost exactly 70 to 75 of those families will show up for this spring and start their Dickinson experience just like their peers did in the fall, with a first-year seminar, with orientation. And of course, we'll do the same for that small percentage of the class that deferred for the full year. So there is some anxiety around that, but I would say nationally, colleges are going to be really eager, on the whole, really eager to fill their classes. Just as this was a disruptive year for families, for finances, for businesses, small businesses especially across the country, it has been incredibly disruptive and difficult for colleges as well. So I suspect, to finally begin to answer your question, Anna, I suspect that colleges are going to be really eager to fill those classes, right? And I think less reticent or concerned about the number of defers that they have kind of coming with them into that year. For Dickinson, typically about 40%, I'm going to say 35 to 45% of our class is filled through early decision. And we last year were between 40 and 45% of our class was filled through early decision. That's what we anticipate again for this year. So we don't expect or anticipate dramatic changes to that, again, foundational building. But just like you, we are uncertain about what the next several weeks and months will bring. So we're not 100% sure what those classes will look like, but historically, a little under half, about 40% of our class is filled through early decision. Leah, anything that I'm not thinking about for the ED versus regular, kind of the makeup of the class there?
Not that I can think of.
Okay.
No, I'm going to move to the next question if that's good with you, because while this person is asking a specific question about the Posse program, this really brings up a couple of things that I'd like to talk about that are applicable for more general questions too, for people who are not in this specific program. So this is asking about scholarships that cover tuition but not room and board. Can the federal aid or the institutional aid go towards room and board? And the answer is yes. So when if students come in with other scholarships, remember that term full demonstrated need, what does that mean? So to get really in the weeds here, all financial aid is based off of the cost of attendance. And that's not just tuition, that's room and board, and not just the build cost either, but expected educational costs that don't get added to the bill, but you are responsible for, like books, personal expenses, travel. That's built into this cost of attendance. Some people refer to it as the student budget. And so that amount minus the expected family contribution as calculated by the Fafsa or the CSS profile, that remaining amount is the demonstrated financial need that we meet. So the cost of attendance, when you add in the billed and non-billed cost, is going to come somewhere around the $75,000 mark. So if you have, let's just call tuition $55,000 for clarity's sake. That means that there's about $15,000 additional dollars that is going to be above the tuition. So if your expected family contribution is $5,000 that brings your remaining demonstrated need to $10,000 if my math is working right on a Saturday. We're going to ask that you contribute some self-help in the form of a $3,500 loan, as well as $2,500 in work study, so that's $6,000, and then you'd get another $4,000 grant from Dickinson on top of that. If you're eligible for a federal Pell Grant, that will factor in to that need as well. So yes, you can receive aid either from federal sources and or Dickinson sources for that. Another important piece is, so for folks who have more demonstrated need than the merit amounts, the merit is the first step towards meeting need. So if you were to have $50,000 in demonstrated need and you were to receive a $30,000 provost scholarship, that would be the first part of meeting that $50,000 in need. And the rest of that $20,000 would come from a combination of that grant, loans, and work study. So just want to highlight there that doesn't stack on top of it. It's a part of meeting need. If you don't have need, obviously that merit goes on top, or if your merit exceeds your need, you get the full merit. But that's just sort of how that works on a quick overview of the mathematics. Another important thing that I haven't mentioned yet is outside scholarships. You all have, 10 months until school starts. And if you have time to apply for your local, Elks Club, community scholarships, that's a really great thing to do. Some schools you'll want to check each school's institutional policy. Dickinson has a very generous policy with outside scholarships, in that we will not reduce our own grants unless you earn so much in outside scholarships that you have exceeded our cost of attendance. So we will always reduce loan and work study eligibility first, and then you still have to be above cost of attendance in order for us to have to reduce grant. So it is absolutely worth your time to complete those applications as you're able. Another great resource that we offer not only for our students, but for prospective students is iGrad. If you go to igrad.dickinson.com, and I'll throw the link in here in a few minutes, you'll have access to all kinds of financial planning tools, including an award letter comparison tool, as well as the most robust outside scholarship search engine I've ever encountered. And these are fully vetted scholarships. So definitely spend some time, check that out. That's a great way to reduce your loan debt as well needed through those outside agencies.
Leah, there's a question coming in that I'm going to start to answer, and then hopefully you can finish answering for me. But the question is about the percentage of students receiving merit-based awards in an incoming class without need-based aid. So if they didn't express need-based aid, what percentage of those families were receiving some type of merit from us? And so let me just start by answering it to give Leah time to maybe either look it up or recall it off of the top of her head. But I would just say that one of the things that Dickinson's really committed to, as Leah has said, and you've heard over and over again, is making a Dickinson education possible. And I told you at the onset, I went to Dickinson, my wife went to Dickinson, my brother went to Dickinson, and his wife went to Dickinson. And I'm happy to share with you too that I was a first generation college student and the first in my family to go to college. And the idea of loans or debt was a daunting thought, as was paying for college in general. I know it won't surprise any of you out there, but I was really delighted to have ultimately chosen a place like Dickinson because of all the reasons that Leah has laid out. And also because of this really good question too. Because one of the reasons our merit-based scholarships exist is to protect, in some ways, the erosion of that kind of middle-class family. And you might know who you are if this sounds like you. You might have done the CSS profile or a calculator or the Fafsa, and you might be a family that's right on the bubble with your ability to pay some or all or just over all the total cost of attendance. And the college might ask you to do just that based on the FAFSA and the profile. It appears as though you can pay everything, but it's gonna ask for every single penny that you have, and perhaps I would suspect in your eyes even beyond that, right? Even beyond what is reasonable, and that's true of some of our families across the socioeconomic spectrum. So part of our merit scholarship strategy is to be able. The reason why, in fact, we still have merit-based scholarships, at least in part, is to be able to thoughtfully award merit to families that often fall right on that bubble. Now, your question might be coming from a totally different end of the economic or socioeconomic spectrum, and that's perfectly fine. Merit scholarships are available for everybody across the merit scholarship, across the socioeconomic spectrum. But I wanted to make sure that I spoke specifically to those families in the middle that are sometimes really pinched by that particular moment. So now Leah perhaps can, I'll see if I stalled long enough to give Leah an opportunity to look up the exact answer to your question about merit beyond need for the incoming classes.
So sort of. That's a really specific question. So Dickinson has some great statistics available on our website. There's something called the common data set that a lot of colleges will put out on their website that really gets into the nuts and bolts of how a college awards aid. So if you really want to spend some time crunching the numbers, I just went out to our common data set. It's still being finalized for the most recent academic year. But it really asks the question, who had absolutely no need. So it doesn't factor in folks who had some need, but the merit way over met that. But it was about 15% of the whole class were folks who had no need and received merit scholarships. That doesn't mean that only 15% of those who have no need received them. So that's a challenging question to answer.
And Leah, and correct me if I'm wrong, and now we're really answering this absolutely live now, but correct me if I'm wrong, but I think about 20% of our, maybe 20-ish% of our overall class is in fact no need, meaning they have not applied for any type of need-based aid, right?
Yes, it varies by year, yep. But it's somewhere between usually 65 to 80% of the class has applied for aid.
So I think actually that gives you a really great sense that if in fact 15% are coming in with some type of merit, and then you have a sense for actually what percentage of the class is represented by that number, you have a pretty good sense now, I think, for how generous the college can be, again, across the socioeconomic spectrum with our merit awards too. Leah, is that fair?
That is absolutely fair, and I'm glad that you quickly picked up on the fact that while I had that 15% number, that wasn't as scary a number as it sounds.
No. In fact, it's
very good.
Like, I think if you slice sliced pieces of the pie across the socioeconomic spectrum, again, I think you would find that across the board too, and I think that's something that we can be proud of as an institution, being able to attract and enroll lots of different types of students to our community too.
Yep.
So we're coming up close to the end of our time. I'm gonna turn it over to my colleague Brian for a second, just to see if he's seeing anything that I'm not, but I do not see any other questions coming in the Q&A. Brian, does that look right to you?
I don't see anything else either. I was going to ask Leah, because I don't know, but I suspect there's some international students who are part of the audience, and so the process is slightly different. Some of the applications that you need, the FAFSA, et cetera, would be different. If you could just dig into that a little bit for the international students who might be in the audience.
Absolutely, and just for everyone, you don't have to have memorized this process just for me talking. We do have the process outline on our website for both domestic and international students. International students, we also meet full demonstrated need. In order to apply for that and demonstrate that, you're using the International Student Financial Aid application. It's linked on our website that you can download and use. That's a College Board form. We can accept the CSS profile, but we prefer the ISFA, and you'll also have to, all international students will have to fill out a certification of finances. And depending on whether your information is coming from income or assets, you may need to provide bank statements and or employment backup information showing that income. So that's in general what's needed for international financial aid application. But again, that's a very generous policy that many schools extend that to that even just extend the full need to domestic students, often don't to international students, but Dickinson does.
And I don't see any other Q&A, and I actually think that that's a really wonderful place to end it. In fact, is that we've gotten a number of questions over the last several months about the college's financial health. And I'm proud to work at an institution that has been really good at planning both for the moment, but also for the future, that we can continue the policies that allow us to be really thoughtful about your applications, really individual, very specific about who you are as a student, and do the exact same thing on the financial aid side, that even in an incredibly difficult moment, perhaps for our nation and the world, that Dickinson, because of some really thoughtful fiduciary management, which again is a fascinating topic to talk about on a Saturday afternoon and evening, but it's true, and it's meaningful for this moment and for our families, and will continue to be for the health of the college for years and years to come. And I know I speak for Leah, I speak for Brian, I speak for all of us, and how proud we are to work in a place that has done that so incredibly well. So Leah, any as we wrap it up here, any last thoughts, comments for our community here?
Just, try to not panic. It's a process. It does take some time and thought, but you have real humans on the other side of it that are going to give a thoughtful and thorough review and try and help your family through it. So I hope that brings some comfort, knowing that in these really uncertain times.
Brian, thank you so much for manning the ship here for us. We appreciate it very much, and bringing up that great topic about internationals to make sure that we're thoughtful about our entire Dickinson community too. So thank you, Brian, for your help tonight too.
Thank you, everyone. And for everybody out there, maybe we need to put our emails in the box, so if they've got further questions, they can get a hold of us later.
Absolutely, and I'd be glad to too. And I think before we wrap up, let's see if I can get over to the chat and throw in my email address really quickly here.
If I can,
I promised I grad and then hadn't yet, so I will do both.
But as we wrap up here, I wanted to express my a deep appreciation for all of the families out there, whether this is the only session you've joined us for the digital open house or the virtual open house, or if this is one of many that you attended. And based on attendance across the board, I suspect that does include quite a few of you. And we are just so grateful that you are considering Dickinson, that this is a place that you would hope perhaps to call your home for 4 years. We love this place, and we'd like to think for a really good reason. This is the very end of our virtual open house for the weekend, but no, it is not the end of the conversation, as Leah said. We stand ready to help you, to support you, to work with you throughout this entire admissions process, and are excited to hear from all of you. So again, thank you to everybody for joining us here tonight. We appreciate it. Be in touch with us, and best of luck to each and every one of you. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Leah. And on behalf of the Dickinson community, best of luck to you, and we hope to see you all soon. Take care, everybody.
Take care.